Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adrienne Gilliard here with Sandra Razan, and we're from the ELC's inclusion team bringing you Behavior Bites Tidbits. So, ending our July theme, where we were talking about all things that are important to children's social emotional health, we are ending July with talking about, is it sensory or behavior in young children? So far, we discussed temperament, trauma, and anxiety and stress. And we know that sensory behavior also contributes to a lot of the things that children are dealing with social emotionally. And the National Institute of Mental Health states that the emotional and behavior disorders affect 10 to 15% of our children globally. And sensory processing disorder, or what they like to call it SPD for the acronym, is a complex disorder of the brain that affects developing children and adults. So as you know, in all of our Behavior Bites tidbit sessions, even when we do our Behavior Bites Zooms, we always say that behavior is a form of communication. And so there's so many factors that contribute to why an individual behaves the way that they do. And so we have to look at a lot of those behavioral problems from a non-linear viewpoint or non-linear lens. And sensory-based behaviors are often used to communicate what an individual wants to obtain or avoid, and especially if a child has decreased communication. So behaviors serve multiple purposes, and they might function to obtain something while simultaneously avoiding something else. So Sandy and I are going to, do what we always tell you to do, is put on our detective hats and figure out the function of those behaviors. And so we're going to unpack some of the complexities of SPD and how it relates to misunderstood behaviors and provide some strategies.
Right. So behavior, what is it? Essentially, behavior is a person or an animal's response to stimuli, right? To any type of stimulus, whether it's outside or internal. Okay. When we talk about sensory, that sensory processing, that's the way that we as people, animals, receive external stimuli and how we interpret it, right? So it's safe to say that a lot of behaviors can be sensory based, right? But not all behaviors are, right? So it's
Right.
almost one of those things that it's one of those caveats that we have to explore. We have to understand, is this what we consider a maladaptive behavior, a direct response to something that is an external or an internal stimuli that child is not processing accurately or correctly in the right ways? And so it's almost like, is it sensory or is it behavior? The answer is yes, right? Because it's one in of itself. It's a layer, right? It's one of those boxes where we just need to make sure that the behavior is not a direct result to an input or an unprocessed external or sometimes internal stimuli, right? And so that's where it becomes difficult, right? And so we have to take so much into account. But I think the number one thing to take into account is all the fundamental needs taken care of, right? So let's make sure that we're not tired, the child is not hungry, the child temperature is right? So we're making sure that there's different external stimuli in our environment that we're just kind of like checking off. Okay, so it's not that it's too cold, it's not that it's too hot. You're almost doing one of these checks and balances, like is it this, is it that, is it this, is it that? Because you need to kind of uncover what does that mean? So when we talk about sensory, right, we think of five senses, right? So what we see, what we hear, what we taste, smell, all the good stuff, right? But then there's that other sixth sense, and that's the vestibular, right? And that it's located in our inner middle ear, right? And so when that is not necessarily working, typically, we have children that struggle with spatial awareness, where their bodies are, and what their body is actually doing in their environment as is, right? So you'll see a lot of spinning. You can see a lot of, you've seen these kids, they just like to spin, right? If I spun that way, I would get nauseous but apparently that child needs additional stimuli, right? So is that behavior, or is that child self-regulating? And this is where, as an educator, we've really got to pull it apart and say, okay, wait, is that behavior something that is needed for that child to feel grounded and regulated? Or is it an attention seeking and, they're just being a kid and enjoy spinning, right? So I think we need to, I don't know, I think we need to just look at it a little more in detail, and not necessarily like, is it this or that?
Yeah.
Rather look at it as a global whole, because all behavior is going to be a response to a stimuli. And what is sensory? Sensory is the way we perceive external and internal stimuli, right? And so one is definitely related to the other. I think that when we as educators, we know when something is excessive, right? And you and I, we just did a training on red flags, right? And so one of the things is prolonged or excessive, right? Those words of it's not an occasional thing. It's not, oh, she likes to spin and then she continues. No. When we say excessive, we're talking about
prolonged. It's not like, well, they just, they just decided to spin for like a few seconds before we sat down for circle time, but they're doing it the entire
time. And you notice that, it occurs especially when they're overstimulated, or they're excited or frustrated, right? You see some of these children, they rock, they can rock. A lot of them like to jump. A lot of them, again, the spinning on the carpet, so these are the things that we need to kind of understand. And when we do have a question, go out and seek the professionals. And who would the professional be in a situation like this? It would be an occupational therapist, right? So we would refer to an occupational therapist. They would then assess to see if there was a need for a sensory diet. And what does that mean? Well, they would figure out, is it a proprioceptive? Is it a vestibular issue? There's so many different.
So what is a sensory diet? Just for those that may not understand what a sensory diet actually is.
So a sensory diet is, think of it almost like a plan, like a behavior plan, but for sensory input needs, right? So depending on what the occupational therapist, and again, they're the therapist, so they know what they're doing. They're the professionals. They will come up with a plan. They call it a sensory diet. And all that is maybe it's increased body movements. Maybe it's increased break time. Again, I'm not an occupational therapist, but if your child or a student requires one, they're your ticket. I mean, they have a wealth of information out there. And it's easy to do, honestly. Like, if it's easy to incorporate a lot of what they require, right? So excessive increased breaks. Okay, that child just became my helper. Can you help me pass out the papers? Can you help me pass out the crayons? Can you, just different strategies like that are easily implemented. But those are the things that we need to, as professionals, look into. Not necessarily, is it this or is it that, but could this behavior, instead of being so frustrating, be that child's way of communicating that they're dysregulated in some way, shape, or form, that something is not processing correctly. And so then what can we do? Loud noises, headphones, bright lights. Maybe they can wear special shades. Maybe we dim the lights. Maybe we don't have those fluorescent white lights. We have those yellow, softer lights. So many different things that we can do, right? Noise level, making sure that the noise level in the classroom is not so extreme, or playing soft music in the background when it's nice and calm, just to kind of, or me as a teacher regulating my tone, my volume, right? So all of these things, texture, right? Making sure that the child. Adrienne, have you ever I don't know about you, but I have a sensory thing with textures too. So like the seam of your sock. If the seam of my sock is off, even slightly, I cannot function. I cannot function. I have to take so those children that are taking off their shoes and their
And
socks.
it's also the children that are taking off their shirts because they don't have tagless t-shirts. The tags that are in the back, they can
Right. So these are all the things these are all the little nuances that we as educators, we really need to just take a step back and see, is it really just the behavior? Understanding that behavior is a response to something. It's a form of communication, right? And if that something is an external stimuli, well, how can I as an educator, be preemptive and proactive and assist, in a sensory based behavior?
right.
Easy things, easy things. And then if it's too much for me, now I know I need to go seek, a therapist, an occupational therapist, and their guidance, or at least direct the families to do so.
Right. Okay. Well, that was really good information. And if you are still experiencing challenging behaviors with any of the children in your classrooms, you can always reach out to Debbie Kay on our warm line, where the number is 954-295-0672. And if you found this video and other videos of ours helpful, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you back here next time. Have a good day.